Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Tuesday, the 23rd of July, comes to you from London. And we start, as always, looking at the dollar index, but of course, the big thing in the UK today is the announcement of a new Prime Minister. And the front runner seems to be Boris Johnson, and the market is pricing that in as a risk to greater risk to no deal. So we're seeing the dollar looking strong against a basket of currencies back into bullish territory. The euro looking weaker, and I guess Brexit is not just negative for the UK potentially, but no deal, but also for the European Union. So we're seeing the euro suffering a little bit there as well. Against the yen, the dollar is looking stronger, and against sterling, we're seeing sterling falling away against that stronger dollar. Sterling back into bearish territory. As we await the result today. We're seeing sterling slightly lower against the euro, but it's actually fairly flat the last few weeks, but still long-term bearish. And against the Swiss franc, we're sitting at 122.33. We are weaker there. Taking a look at Bitcoin, we're just holding on to $10,000 this morning. In fact, just as I speak, it's just dropped below $10,000. So we are hovering around this 10,000 mark this morning. The US market was actually up slightly last night, and the Nasdaq also recovering there, and the Dow just up again very slightly. The Russell 2000 still in bearish territory. We're not seeing the US rally really across the board, and this is a good market breadth measure in itself. Just seeing the Russell 2000, the Nasdaq, the S&P futures up 0.17%, the Nasdaq E-mini up 0.2%. Does suggest we'll see the market slightly higher. Still very much waiting for the Fed to see what they do on interest rates. The UK market is up slightly this morning, up 0.5%, and the weaker sterling helping blue chips there. Midcaps also up 1/3%, and still holding on to bullish medium and short-term goals there. Germany up quite sharply this morning, weaker euro helping there, and the CAC current up 1/3%. And we did see markets in Asia recover pretty much last night. Japan was up 0.75%, the Hang Seng was up 1/3%, and the Chinese market up 0.4%, although it still remains bearish on all three time frames. India was up 1/3%, still looking good on the long-term chart, still short-term bearish, and the Aussie market was up 0.5%, and this is actually one market that's really raced to new highs, looking stronger than others. Brent crude holding on to the gains with the Iran crisis, of tanker been taken there, the British tanker, and we're seeing crude oil just holding on to gains yesterday, but we are still in bearish territory. I mean, as much as this crisis is going on, we were higher a week ago for the price of crude oil, so it needs to be remembered, and WTI as well. So it's taken this crisis very much in a stride, not really having a massive impact on oil prices due to the weaker trend. And we're seeing US nat gas sitting at $2.31. Gold has slipped back a little bit this morning at $1,417, putting it into short-term bearish territory, but still looking very strong on the medium and long-term charts. And silver, of course, following suit, although looking a little bit better on the short-term chart. US 10-year yields sitting at 2.05%, so we are just seeing teetering along at this sort of just low 2% level. Looking at the individual stocks now, we see a sea of green here on the indices. This data all coming from Yahoo. Taking a look at the Dow 30, just ranking the stocks here, we saw that Apple were the best performers today, up 2.3%. In fact, tech shares did pretty well. Intel up 2.1%, and Microsoft up 1.3%. Hitting those all-time highs, and the relative performance on Microsoft still 15% better than the Dow this year. Taking a look at the Nasdaq, of course, we saw there we had some pretty big rises. Applied Materials are up 6%. And Western Digital up 5%, so some pretty big rises there. On the downside, we still did have Netflix down another 1.4%. That really has clearly taken their position to short-term bearish on those subscriber numbers. 8-9% downside targets there, so one to watch. The Aussie market overnight was pretty strong. Bellamy's up 4.8%. That recovery continuing quite well. And Sierra Resources, another one we often see in the leaderboard, not yet reversing the downtrend there. So we see these counter trend moves for Sierra, but not enough. Domain Holdings Australia were down 6%, and Adelaide, Brighton were down 4%. So still a lot of poor looking charts despite the Aussie market breaking out. Taking a look at the Indian market now, we look at Kotak Mahindra, they were up 3.7%. Here we see the live pricing coming in from Yahoo, and looking pretty strong there. On the downside, we had housing development. They were weaker, although the trend is still up. Looking to Europe now, if we look at the UK market this morning, we've got Mondi, they're up 3.5%. Chart looking quite good on the medium term. Long term still has work to do. Relative not really turning around yet. And Melrose we can see here as well. Taking a look at the downside in the FTSE, we've got Whitbread. They're down 4% this morning. That's quite a fall away for them. And Tesco down 2.5%, and Ocado giving up some ground as well. Sainsbury's down as well. We're seeing pretty much, and Morrison, so supermarkets been hit generally this morning. IAG, British Airways strike, is starting to have a little bit of an impact there as well, and that will be interesting to see how that develops. But we do have downside targets that are activated quite a bit lower. Looking at the midcaps in the UK, the 250, Nvidia is the best performer. They're up 5%. Beazley is next. They're up 3%. The chart's looking fairly sanguine there, a lot of sideways movement. And if we go to the poor performers, we've got Amigo Holdings, they're down 5.7%. That chart not looking good at all. And Funding Circle, of course, has been in the news lately, and that chart hitting new lows as well. Ted Baker had a little bit of improvement yesterday on better than expected results, but we're seeing a bit of that unwinding today. Taking a look at Europe now, the top performers in Europe are BMW, we're seeing there. We've got quite strong performance there, and Daimler. So carmakers are leading the board here, and Volkswagen. So the top three stocks are carmakers. So European carmakers having a good morning of it. And if we look at the downside, we've got Adidas, LVMH. Adidas still looking amazing on the chart though. 30% outperformance on the Dow this year, and LVMH we're seeing also 30% outperformance this year. So we have this strange situation where the poor performers today again are the best looking charts. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.